so far has been a kind of extensive research or study to evaluate the Tibetan education system as on the whole, on a larger scale. So we got the funding from the Tibetan Education Project by the Tibet Fund, and it's actually aided through the US aid. And there's some groundwork done on that, and Professor Ngawang is already involved with that. He has been very kind to be a part of that. And today, what I want you to bring home to you is this research study will take afoot very soon, and we would like to get your feedback, your priorities, your opinions as to what are the priorities that should be included in the research work. And I would also like to request Ngawang to elaborate a little more on this as we move on during the session. So this, and then also we would like you as a member of the EAC to involve with this study that will have a very long-term impact on the entire Tibetan education movement as such. So this is what I wanted to say. And then the second thing, we were actually a little stingy with the time as far our involvement was concerned. Right from the beginning, we said we do not take much of time. We should give the panelists more time because your time is very precious to us. So that is why we try to cut short, even in terms of giving an introduction about like different kinds of schools that we have. So the Department of Education, and then it looks like yesterday that some of you are not that well acquainted with the education structure as such. So just briefly, to 1 minute, I wanted to say that the Department of Education is one of the major departments of the CTA, Central Tibetan Administration, and under that aegis, under the umbrella of that department, so we have different school systems. One is the Central Tibetan Schools Administration, which is fully funded and managed through this organization, fully funded by the government of India. And we have 21 schools in that category. And then it has a governing board where there are 4 members from the Tibetan, from the CTA and from Education Department as well. And then there are 4 members from the Indian government. And then the office is based in Delhi. So, and our education officers, they collaborate with the education officers of the CTSA in trying to find, go for inspection, and then periodical evaluation and that sort of thing. So that's a Central Tibetan Schools Administration. And then other one is Tibetan Children's Village School. It's an autonomous school. The network. It has 18 schools under its care, and it is fully funded by the NGO itself by raising funds and through sponsorships and like that. So we have the president of the Tibetan Children's Village School with us in the observers capacity as today. So they have their schools everywhere across India. And then we have Sambhota Tibetan Schools Society. Our director is also here with us as an observer. So they have 11 schools, and this is also this is actually in a way funded by the Department of Education to a large scale, but operationally it is done by the director and his office. And then there's the Tibetan Homes Foundation, Missouri. We have education director with us here as an observer, and they have 3 schools, and that also is funded by the organization itself. And then there are some independent schools in India that are run by the Tibetan societies and like that. And then there are a few schools in Nepal which are managed by the Snowline Foundation. It's an organization in Nepal. There's the Tibetan schools. There are 12 of them. And also Department of Education periodically, occasionally visit these schools and also do some funding for them. So this is how we work. On a policy matter, the Department of Education takes care of, and even in terms of workshop and like that, we also always conduct workshops where we include all the teachers and staff members from these different organizations. But internally, many of these schools are autonomously run. So this is just a brief kind of glimpse or picture of the Tibetan school system right now in India and Nepal. Thank you so much.
As you can actually see, not only there are different categories of Tibetan schools, but they are located in many different parts of India, and also schools in Nepal, which are kind of like transnational in context. And so, these locations, themselves provide, pressing challenges to the administration of Tibetan schools. And so, I'm going to be working with some other additional, research scholars, and very closely with Tibet Education Project to develop, 2-3 kind of like survey questionnaires, which will be really developed very carefully, and of course, a lot of discussions that took place yesterday were very helpful for me, at least in terms of conceptualizing what are the issues that I want to really include as a part of our research project. So. And I just want to assure you that we will do our best in terms of making sure that research questionnaires are developed in a way that is very sensitive, responsive to different locations and context. And we'll be working very closely with others, educators as well. So in this context, I would like to say that we'll be seeking your advice and suggestions, and we hope you will be very cooperative with us. Please, share your expertise. And that will be really greatly appreciated. So I think, thank you. Well, okay. I'm very thankful for Department of Education, especially Kesawandila, for asking me to be chair for this morning's session. And I hope you have had a very restful night and you're ready for this morning's very exciting, stimulating session. And I'm very much looking forward to this session as the chair of this session. Now, I was thinking about how do I really want to structure this morning's session. And as the chair of this session, I have some kind of a liberty, I would say. And so then when I was thinking very, I would say, thoroughly, it sort of occurred to me that Department of Education has really developed a very comprehensive agenda for us. And so I would really like to use the items in the agenda itself as a way of structuring my remark for this morning's session. Then also I would like to actually ask our panelists at the time of their sharing their views and recommendations to use that agenda item as a way to really share your perspectives, so that our suggestions, our perspectives would be really very directed and focused. I think that is something I would like to do very differently this morning. Now, before I begin my actual kind of remark, I would like to offer you this kind of a framework as a way to contextualize my presentation. Now, when you look at language planning, generally there seems to be like 3 planning activities. One is corpus. So, for example, textbook publication and, development of new lexicons and translation of, well-known children's stories into Tibetan language. And that would be like, part of this corpus planning. And then when I read Kesanla's actually research report, it was very clear to me that we haven't really paid attention to this aspect of the planning. He said that textbooks have not been at all reviewed and renewed for the last 10 years or so, which is really very, very long time. So I think we need to pay attention to this aspect of the planning because, language promotion will not take place in vacuum. We need to pay attention to this corpus planning. And then the second sort of like aspect of the planning activity would involve what is called status planning. So, this actually aspect involves to enhance language, the target language itself. So when I was thinking about the status planning, I realized that the very fact that Department of Education has introduced Tibetan language as the language of instruction, at least in the elementary grade level, is a really wonderful example of status enhancement for Tibetan language. And then, of course, these days we do see like Tibetan language is used in, in radio, in television, and not only that, we get to see our parliamentarians, using Tibetan language. And I think those are really wonderful examples for us to think of them as status-enhancing activities for us as a community. And then yesterday, Milamla really brought to our attention, in terms of this, and I think it sort of like belongs to this status planning aspect. India has this 3-language kind of formula, which is really marvelous, which really accommodates almost all the languages in India. And so as a part of this 3-language formula, I'm sure you are very familiar with this. And, basically, you have 2 options. If you are like non-Hindi speaking, individuals like myself or Tibetan children, then of course your mother tongue is one language, and then Hindi, and then English. And then for those Hindi speaking individuals, students, for example, Hindi is of course their mother tongue, and then, one regional language, and then English as the 3rd language, so which is really marvelous. And this actually template is being used in other countries as well. I was quite surprised in European countries. So India has really paved the way for this trilingualism kind of like, concept all over the world. And then, of course, and I was trying to gain a sense of where does, Tibetan language really belong to. And, there are only 22 recognized languages according to Schedule 8 of Indian Constitution. And then, non-scheduled list include 1,652. And Tibetan language is dropped in that box. And so in terms of status, planning, I was thinking, really, we must really find a way to elevate Tibetan language, maybe to this Schedule 8 category. And I think this can be done rather easily. Tibetan language is used in many, places in India, in many Himalayan regions. And not only the Tibetan language is taught in many, Western countries, and also it is, spoken in many countries. And in terms of literary value of Tibetan language, I think it has all the qualities that this language can easily be elevated. And then I think this will really, open new doors for us. And, then I was thinking, how do we strategize, in terms of elevating this language to this Schedule 8 within the Indian Constitution? And I think we need to really work with our Himalayan region people and other countries as well, and really explore how Tibetan language is mutually beneficial language. And this language really provides access to this very rich Buddhist cultural heritage, which is actually Indian heritage. So India has responsibility to make sure that their heritage is preserved in Tibetan language. So I think this will really lend a very, very strong argument in order to elevate the status of language. And then, of course, lastly, language acquisition planning. So this aspect really involves how do we really promote a language proficiency for all students. And really this very nicely leads to my agenda item, which is number 1, nurturing highly competent professional bilinguals. That means, we need to really identify what programs will help us to produce, highly proficient bilingual individuals. And in order to do this, I think it is very important for us at least to gain, some theoretical perspective, so that whatever program we choose, the programs are grounded in some theoretical grounding perspective. I think it's very important, so that whatever we do will be very successful, and we would be able to modify in the future. And not only that, our Tibetan case could be a wonderful case study for the rest of the world as to how we have implemented a wonderful, successful bilingual education, or whatever we might call it. The other, countries are really struggling. America is struggling very much. Countries like Canada, although they've been experimenting with, two-way bilingual programs for the last 60, 70 years, but still they are struggling. But the nature of struggle is slightly different from our case. But all I want to say is we can be a wonderful vessel for other educators and countries to come and learn from us. That will be a part of our contribution to the world, education, particularly education of children. So I'd like to really focus a little bit on this theoretical aspect. And there are two perspectives that I'd like to share with you. One is called interdependence. That is, children's ability to learn the second or third language would really depend to a large extent on their language proficiency in native language. And this has been really proven frequently, abundantly. And not only that, the children's ability to acquire proficiency in the second language would also depend on his or her level of proficiency in the native language. The native language proficiency has to be very, very high in order to benefit from this second language acquisition process. So there is a very clear link between native language and second language acquisition. And then another perspective that really lends itself very beautifully for our case is called threshold hypothesis, which really might help us in terms of identifying effective programs for us. Now, what this really suggests is that in order for a child to become bilingual, highly proficient bilingual, the child must develop two levels of language. One is called BICS, Basic Interpersonal Communicative Skills, and the other one is called Cognitive Academic Linguistic Proficiency, which is actually called as academic language. And so that means for a child to cross the threshold, he or she must develop high levels of BICS and CALP in both languages. Then only one becomes highly proficient bilingual individuals. And in the process of becoming highly proficient bilingual education of individual, for example, we need to emphasize native language instruction, because second language will be, the ability to acquire second language depends to a large extent on this first language proficiency. And so there is that close link. And now if an individual really develops just, BICS in one language and BICS and CALP in the other language, then this individual would not be qualified as a highly proficient bilingual individual. He would be called either as a limited or partial bilingual individual. So it seems when I looked at the paper that Kasala wrote, we seem to be really kind of like producing this kind of individuals in our school systems, which is really not the kind of goals that we should strive for. Okay, let's see. And then, so this threshold hypothesis is also very important to keep in mind. Now, in case you're wondering what are the programs that might really embed these two theoretical perspectives, one well-known program is called two-way immersion bilingual program. Now, two-way bilingual programs are very, very common in many, many countries. And they have become quite common in America as well. Last time when I read, there are about 320 two-way bilingual programs. America is slowly waking up to this, to what two-way bilingual programs can do in terms of really preparing our children with bilingual skills. So there are two types. One is called 50-50, which is, you allocate equal amounts of language, for example, English and Tibetan would be 50-50. And I think in the Tibetan case, we can easily use this. For example, one week could be used just using English as the language of instruction, and the other week could be used as Tibetan as the language of instruction, so that we then really truly encourage our children to develop BICS and CALP in both languages. And this actually takes about anywhere from 7 to 10 years So this actually addresses our, next kind of question. Should we really, Tibetanize the next, 6th, 7th grade or whatever it is? And I think I would strongly suggest that we should really continue to use this two-way bilingual program so that our Tibetan children are not only proficient in Tibetan language, really highly proficient in Tibetan language, they are also proficient in Tibetan, in English language as well. And then I was thinking, really we must become the generation. We must be known as the generation that has not only sustained Tibetan language, but has really pushed the Tibetan language to a higher level, to greater heights. But otherwise, we will really seriously reduce the ability of next generation of Tibetans to access this very rich Buddhist cultural heritage. Not only that Tibetan language is so closely tied to our identity, we have a moral responsibility to ensure that Tibetan language is sustained. It is being decimated in its own country of origin, in Tibet. Tibetan language is more seen as a problem rather than a resource. So, in this country, we have this wonderful opportunity to consider Tibetan language as a resource, as a, linguistic right. And so we must really capitalize on the opportunities presented by our host country. Let's see. And then also, the next one is, how do we really help, when children move from 6th grade, I think it's 6th, yeah, from 6th grade, in terms of their transition. And then if we implement this 50-50 kind of like two-way bilingual program, then this problem is really solved. So that is one solution. In case we really cannot implement this 50-50 two-way bilingual program, and then what I would suggest is we must really begin a very slow transitional phase. And in fact, what we can do is we can use something called 90-10 kind of module. That is, you begin with 90% of the time in Tibetan language, 10% in English, and then slowly increase the English language instruction. And so that when you get to this, 6th, 7th grade, then you have actually come to 50-50 kind of situation. And that will really resolve this transitional. Otherwise, it will be a very traumatic experience for the Tibetan children when they're suddenly thrown into this English language kind of, medium of instruction. That might disrupt their, academic learning to some extent. And another thing I really want to kind of bring to your attention is in America there is actually there are two scholars who did a huge longitudinal study for 14 years, Thomas and Queller. And we cite their studies quite frequently in my bilingual education classes. What they did is they really looked at the academic records of about 40,000 language minority students in America. And what they found, I think, has a lot of relevance for our situation. They said, this is, their final analysis led to this conclusion. The most powerful predictor and indicator of academic success in second language is directly linked to formal learning in native language 1. So that means the more we teach our Tibetan children, all the academics using Tibetan as the language of instruction, there's a likelihood that they will excel, in academics in English language. I know at this point we might be thinking, how is this possible? But really this has been proven. Really in many countries. You can look at Canadian experience, you can look at Australian experience, you can look at New Zealand experience. I've extensively read literature from all these countries because I really want to learn so that I can really prepare my teachers who might end up being a bilingual teacher. But in our case, we have a very unique, wonderful opportunity to really do a wonderful, bilingual two-way, whatever it is, because we don't have the problem that exists in America. In America, in one class, we have, I would say, 30 different languages. It is almost impossible. But in our case, Our teachers are bilingual. Our students are more or less bilingual. Really, it is a matter of putting extra effort to make sure that we really, make sure that our Tibetan children grow up to be highly proficient bilingual individuals. Then, they will be able to play a kind of like a leadership role in many different settings. I think I've addressed 1 and 2 as well, and 3rd. And then there is this issue of intensive English language program for Sambhota Tibetan Schools. And this actually I'm going to leave for our panelists to share their expertise with us. So now at the conclusion, what I want to say is really, finally, what really takes place in the classroom will ultimately determine whether our individual students will become highly proficient bilinguals or not. And so, of course, it's very important to emphasize teacher education. I think that has a very important role. And then, of course, also we need to make sure that we have textbooks that would really support our teachers to be able to do a wonderful work in the classroom settings. And then, and I was also looking at, this Tibetan language issue when I was reading Kasanla's report. He has really provided a lot of, he has identified a lot of problems with the Tibetan language instruction. And what he has found is that, Tibetan language teachers really, they tend to emphasize the content to the neglect of Tibetan language itself. To me, this is a classic case of putting the cart before the horse. So there's no way that language horse can run because, you are teaching content before the language. But of course, in order to teach language, we need the content. But if I'm a language teacher, I really must emphasize language over the content. Content might be a means to an end, because I like to contextualize my language instruction within certain context. Then language learning becomes meaningful, becomes relevant. Then students will be really excited because they can apply that language skill to a content context. So that was quite kind of interesting for me to read. And then also he has found that a lot of these textbooks have not been reviewed, which I actually alluded to already. So I think there is a lot of careful attention that we must pay. And then finally, I want to say this: classroom teachers really must provide a space for our children to interact, to interpret textbooks that they come across, they read, because textbooks should not be talking to the children. Children should be talking to the textbook so that the textbooks become meaningful to them. When the textbook becomes meaningful to them, then they're likely to be motivated. They're likely to really, read the textbook further. But if you don't ensure that the children are given opportunity to interact with the textbook, to talk to the textbook first and foremost, if the textbook is talking to the children, then the children's ability to talk to the textbook is reduced significantly. Really, a teacher should, I was reading somewhere else, a teacher's job is to create conditions for children so that learning takes place. And then I was also reminded of what Aristotle said. I thought that was really a wonderful thing. He said, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And this beautifully actually, goes with what His Holiness has been saying. So His Holiness is a very good partner in Aristotle, who has actually said this thousands of years ago. So all I'm trying to say is, in order to emphasize the heart, then of course we must provide space for our children to interact with the textbook. Textbook should be a means to an end, but not an end in itself. I think that would be really a kind of disaster. I think this really concludes my chair's remark. Now I'm going to take this liberty. As a chair, I really enjoy this position. I'm just kidding. As I had already said, I'm really going to request our panelists to really identify the agenda item that they would like to discuss. I think this will be helpful for our Department of Education as well, in terms of making sure that our perspectives, our views are kind of like focused and directed. Of course, you have the freedom to choose all 3 or 4, or but at least please you preface by saying that this is the item number that I would like to address as a part of my remark. I think that would be greatly appreciated. Now, in terms of ensuring gender equality, I'm going to ask Kamalaji to begin sharing her remarks.
Okay, I've been thinking a great deal about this over the last couple of days. Actually, this whole question has assumed huge significance in my mind. I had known about it, but not ever thought so deeply about it. So I think I'm speaking on the third point right now, because it's in response to what Karmala brought up yesterday. I was quite moved by what I heard, and I thought hard about it. And I hope I'm not going to sound impertinent, but I'm just giving my view as a complete newcomer to all this. It struck me that this question of the loss of a language is not new, it's not unique. As you all know, many people in other parts of India feel strongly that English medium education is a curse, and it's destroying their state's language. For instance, in Karnataka, there are many people who feel that Kannada is being lost because of English medium schools. And I think about 23 years ago, the government issued a ban on new English medium schools being started in the state. And our school began that year, so we were illegal for 18 years. And like Jamia, maybe we were the best in those 18 years when we were illegal. So this issue we have heard a lot about. For instance, in our school, when children come in at age 6 or 7, having heard and spoken only their mother tongue, within a few months, poof, the mother tongue is gone, disappears, and the parents come and tell us that we still speak to them in Kannada, but they reply only in English. So we see this loss in all our children. And when I look there's a lot of rhetoric about language, but there is also some deeply thought out and very well expressed concern about the loss of language. And I'm now thinking about those people whom I hear speaking eloquently about it. But I notice that these people are all educated in English, and more importantly, I notice that they have chosen to send their children to English medium schools. And I don't so I've been trying to understand why, because these are people of very good conscience. These are people who are really wise, caring. They're doing very good work in India with issues facing in the Indian situation today. So why is it that their children are slipping into English medium schooling? And in trying to understand it, I have thought to myself that I'm sure they want their deepest values to be passed down to their children. I don't think they want their children to be successful or chasing after money or be ambitious or go to America. That's not it, okay? But for some reason, they have given less importance to this question of the mother tongue when it comes to bringing up their children. Maybe they feel that their children will become more global citizens and still do good. And when I look at many young people that I see like this, I do feel that the inner sense of goodness cannot be wiped out by the English language, however vile it may be. I hope I'm not sounding rude in saying so, but just something that I felt. But I had also read a lot the material that Gelson and Kalsang have given us. And I thought to myself that in order to uphold the principles of that basic education policy, and that His Holiness also states that of nurturing Tibetan children to be the seeds of peace and goodness throughout the world. I feel you really need, as you have said, a strong bilingual and biliterate, I don't know if there is such a word, a biliterate Tibetan community. I don't know if what we will end up with is a sub-community of such really strong biliterate people. Just like in India, not every child who goes through the education can have both in the strength that you describe, but there will always be some who have that deep interest. At least we shouldn't kill that possibility for such a group to come up. So then I'm looking at the model that actually I read the model, but what you gave sounded very interesting, that you have Tibetan medium till grade, say, 6. Maybe that can be pushed even till grade 8. Then, and during those years, we have English as a second language. Of course, we have to strengthen that. And I was wondering, what models can we use from around the world? Because generally, ESL research, English as a second language research, is not appropriate for our situation because they don't care really what happens to the mother tongue. The point of ESL research is to anglicize children. So that may not apply. So what you said about us having to create that here, I think it's very true. I don't know anywhere else in the world where this particular situation prevails. Then your 50-50 model, 90-10 model, it sounded very good. But suddenly when you said 1 week this, 1 week that, I thought that seems like a very crude translation of that. Isn't there something more elegant that we can come up with? I don't know. I have no idea. You would know best. Is there something like subject-wise division, math and science in English? And I don't know. Everything sounds crude at this point, so I don't know. But something more elegant that we can come up with. Yeah, that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you very much, Kamalaji.
The subject we are discussing today, I think has great problems of consensus building as well as clarifying our own thoughts about what the problems are. I understand that the Tibetan community and the administration both quite naturally or understandably tend to look at the problem as well as the possible solutions in the context in which they are placed, namely the Indian subcontinent. And India's attempt to deal with language education in the context of its own colonial history and its own underdeveloped education system. That compulsion I can understand. But my advice would be that perhaps the Tibetan administration and the academic members of that setup of the establishment need to think quite afresh about both the problem, how they understand the problem, and about the possible ways to resolve the issues which they are identifying. To my mind, India offers at best a negative model. India has seriously neglected the message of all major psychologists and psycholinguists of the 20th century so far. Or we have very belatedly caught up with what is known as the cognitive revolution and its implications for language learning in schools. The Indian system has barely caught up with it now, and we have a long way to go in improving our system, even though we have made politically correct noises for a long time now. And these noises do satisfy a political purpose, no doubt about it. And language, I do know, has a political purpose as well. But when it comes to the pedagogic role that language learning or language education plays in a child's life, India really doesn't have much to offer. And I think thinking about this matter has to start quite afresh and with an openness of mind. In this very brief remark, I would like to touch upon maybe one, perhaps, or one and a half issues that I think are good starting points for us to think afresh about it. It's been pointed out by no dearth of a large number of major linguists of the 20th century that language at heart is an oral phenomenon. It's sound, and human beings give meanings to sound, and that's how language communities are born. That's why language becomes so important to life and becomes the foundation of all learning, no matter what subjects are learned later. So the key is that the desire to give meaning to sound and to derive meanings from sounds which have been used by generations in the past. By using a language, one becomes part of that heritage of language users. Now, in that relationship, there are these two aspects to that oral world of language. There is the part of listening, and there is the part of speech. And these really are the core faculties involved in language learning. It's quite remarkable how a highly evolved oral civilization of India lost its oral skills in such a short period as merely 200 years. Today, you rarely find good listening skills among Indian children and even among Indian parliamentarians. Listening is not just patience. Of course, patience is part of the culture of listening, but listening is also paying attention. Paying attention not merely to the last part of a sentence, but to the entire utterance of the person with whom you are talking. Listening has so many other functions in terms of how we respond to sounds in our environment, natural sounds and other sounds. And in speech communities in which we live, different speech communities in which we live, there are cultural, there are professional communities and so on, listening has a tremendous role in terms of our development as human beings. And this is one very major area of weakness of the language curriculum in our schools, that we are unable to see listening as a curricular area which has to be developed and has to be given the greatest focus in the early grades, but throughout the school's age, it's very important to give this the highest primacy because listening shapes personality, it shapes relationships, it shapes peace in society. It's fundamental. Despite the enormity of research available on who is a good language listener, who is a good language user, and what kind of listening skills that person has, listening has been at a great loss today in our world, and certainly India offers very little, except for a report of the National Focus Group, which was set up in the context of the National Curriculum Framework, which emphasized it and pointed out number of issues. And I would recommend to the administrative staff to procure a copy of that National Focus Group report and study it to see. It was chaired by a major linguist of India, and all major linguists were members of that committee. So it's an important document which gives us some guidance. The other part is speech. And one hardly needs to say it. It's so obvious that speech has everything to do with all aspects of the child's growth and development across the curriculum. In fact, the National Curriculum Framework has a whole section called Language Across the Curriculum, in which this issue is taken up, how important it is for us to pay attention to the manner in which children use language, feel free to use speech in class as a means of learning, how teachers must become conscious of the spoken word as the carrier of not just knowledge, but the motivation to have knowledge. It creates the desire for knowledge. And teacher education, as it prevails today, is a big zero in terms of creation in Indian system, I'm saying, in terms of the creation of this consensus among teachers and understanding among teachers that how they speak shapes the extent to which children are going to feel motivated to learn. It shapes ethics, it shapes culture of the classroom, it shapes democracy in the classroom. How different children are spoken to from different backgrounds. The teacher is not merely here the role model in a sort of psychological or behavioral sense. The teacher is representative of the culture in the way in which the teacher uses speech. So if the Tibetan administration is putting together a good teacher training program, both pre-service program and an in-service professional development program, I can't think of any area which requires as much fresh thinking, rethinking, and application of knowledge which exists now in the world. In fact, in linguistics, we were lucky in India. Since ancient times, we have been interested in how language works, and there have been great philosophers in the past. But in the 20th century, of course, linguistics has become a science, and we have plenty of research to show